Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Pink Flame of Liberty. This is the Saturday show. Of course, I am recording this the day before, and what we're going to get to today, perhaps multiple news items, but what I have planned so far is to cover, and please do not get triggered by the title. It's just something I like to do, and I'm going to explain. Obviously, the title of the show, if you're watching on YouTube, but you should be if you're not, at youtube.com/Pink Flame of Liberty, is Being Fair to the Left on Abortion. Now, I realize that to a more conservative audience, which is the typical listenership of this station, that could be a bit triggering. But I do think some of the very conservative commentary, not libertarian commentary per se, conservative commentary, has not been entirely fair. And I'm sure it goes both ways. But we're talking about conservative commentators right now. We can critique the left to say be fair to the right on abortion and some other program. This is just what struck my fancy today. Also, understand that being fair also means acknowledging where the criticism is legitimate. So being fair goes both ways. And the way I'm going to frame at least this portion of the show is interacting with commentary by Ben Shapiro on this particular topic right after Roe versus Wade was overturned. Ready? Let's get started.
Obviously, on Friday, the Supreme Court drops a historic decision, the biggest decision that it's made in nigh on 50 years. Basically saying that Roe versus Wade is now overturned and the issue of abortion returns to the state level, where a wide variety of states will now actually attempt a wide variety of legislative solutions on the question of when life ought to be protected in the womb.
Okay, but is that really the proper way or the only way to frame the issue? I'm going to be interspersing in here, not just as we get going, being fair to the left, but also interspersing just some libertarian views in here. Libertarians are not monolithic on this. Not everyone agrees with me, but I'm going to be giving you this libertarian's view. When you start dealing with laws, you do have to determine, at least from a libertarian perspective, whether this is something that the state has any right to do. And even if they have a right to do it, is this really something you want the state interfering in? And the issue is not merely, and to frame it this way, is not being fair, and it's not being exactly intellectually honest, in my opinion, as when shall human life be protected in the womb? Because there are, at a minimum, two different interests here. I know there could be others that people would bring in, but it would be the woman herself and the developing baby. It's not just merely of when are we going to protect the baby, because the opposite of that is assuming a woman that does not want to remain pregnant. It is, when is it justified to compel someone to have to use their body to support the life of another? Contrary to many pro-choicers, I do believe, and I think if we look at situations outside of abortion, nearly everyone will agree, there are situations in which people can be compelled to support the life of another, even in questions where it's unquestionably full rights-bearing human beings we're dealing with. If I do something through my actions, through my negligent actions, that a reasonable person would have acted differently to cause you harm, or you could no longer support your own life, or you can't support your life fully, yes, legally, under tort law, I can be compelled to use part of my money, which I earn through my body, to support you. Even if I don't want to, I can be compelled to. That is the underlying basis of tort law. Of course, we start getting into a lot of nuance here, because even in, libertarian responsibility theory, specific performance is something that is not generally a thing. there can be damages awarded. Like, for instance, say I sign a contract to sell you my kidney, and then I change my mind. I could owe you damages, but I don't owe you my kidney, because we recognize that there's a difference between money and a body part. There's a difference between a front porch and a uterus. But let's continue.
Again, prior to Roe, this was the status of all law in the United States.
Okay, but that just begs the question as to whether or not that is legitimate. I am going to be invoking the specter of slavery here, because I do think the analogies in law. No, I'm not comparing, having to carry a baby to being a slave. I'm not going down that rhetorical road. What I am doing, though, is just talking about the status of law. There was a point in time in this country where different states had different laws as to whether or not it was okay for one human being to own another human being of a different race. So just merely stating a fact that there was a period of time where different states had different laws. Okay, if all he is stating that is as a fact, as a neutral fact, all right. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's good or that it's right, as the example of slavery shows.
But Roe stopped that conversation with a bunch of justices arrogating to themselves the power to determine what standards should be set nationally on abortion.
Okay, yes, and you want to know what? The law arrogated to itself a national standard as to whether or not it was okay to own another person because they were a different race. There are some things in which it is perfectly appropriate to have a national standard on, and that is when it comes to fundamental human rights. To say that this should be arrogated to the states is to assume your argument that we're not dealing with a fundamental human right. But you need to take the left where they come from, in which that this is a fundamental human right, and understand if you take their argument for the sake of argument only as true, you can understand why they would be deeply upset. If this is in fact a fundamental human right, then devolving it out to the states is wrong. And the same way that it'd be wrong to devolve out to the states whether or not you could own another human being merely because they were a different race.
Any pretext in the Constitution, they didn't even bother to try and really make an argument as to why the Constitution mandated that the Supreme Court arrogate that power to itself.
Okay, I'm going to intervene here, and I am going to attempt to make a constitutional argument. All right, now, I know there are various methods of interpretation of the Constitution, and most conservatives, and I dare say some libertarians, would not agree with what I'm going to say. But you can only understand documents in context. Words appear in a context, and I know strict constructionists will limit the context to merely the surrounding words, but I don't think you can. I think you need to interpret it from the soil from which it sprung, or in the soil from which it sprung, which was the Declaration of Independence. And the Declaration of Independence is nonsensical and incoherent without understanding the idea of fundamental individual rights. And there is one right to rule them all, like there's one ring to rule them all, and that is the right to self-ownership, that you are the person with autonomy over your own body so long as you are not committing aggression against other people. Now, I know we're going to start getting into the question as to whether or not abortion is aggression. But just like people who interpret the Bible will tell you in the Ten Commandments, it does not say thou shalt not kill. It says thou shalt not murder. There's a difference. I can concede, and most libertarians can concede, even if they don't agree, that we are talking about a rights-bearing human being. But that doesn't settle the question in and of itself. Because there are times, for instance, if there's an intruder in your home, there's no doubt that that person is a full rights-bearing human being, but you're still allowed to shoot and kill them. So there are fundamental differences here. But getting back to the Declaration of Independence, it is nonsensical without self-ownership. And I do think that you can make an argument that there needs to be a nationwide standard on abortion based upon the principle of self-ownership. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean even that you would come to the conclusion of abortion on demand, from conception through birth or in every certain circumstance, but there certainly is an argument to be made that the states cannot abrogate the fundamental right of self-ownership. Of course, laws right now do that all the time, so I can understand why Ben or some other conservatives would not find this argument persuasive, because they're not arguing that drug laws are unconstitutional. But under the principle of self-ownership, they absolutely and utterly should be. And drugs were not illegal in the founding of this country, so it's not something that's patently obvious that, the government has the right to say, what I can put in my body. And if it doesn't like it, or it somehow deems it's bad for society without showing some kind of direct aggression, that it has a right to prohibit it. No, it doesn't. So under the principle of self-ownership, a very strong case can be made that it's wrong to devolve this out to the states. The right of a woman over her body is not a state decision. Now, of course, we can argue as to whether or not that is what's at play here. I know some people will say that's not at play here, but taking the left on their own terms, that is what is at play here, you can't so smugly as you're doing, Ben, go, it's obvious. There's nothing in the Constitution about this, and this should be devolved out to the states. That is not at all evaluating claims on their own terms. Okay, and welcome back, everyone. Before we continue, I do have to thank one of my personal sponsors, which is Asteros.com, which is ASTEROS.com. It's spelled a little differently than it sounds, and they are a cybersecurity services company, so they poke and prod at your digital locks to determine where your organization or business may be vulnerable online. They also offer cybersecurity training where, they'll do little tests to make sure that your employees are not going to fall for phishing attacks and the like. And right now, for my listeners, they are offering a free surface penetration audit at asteros.com/free. That is ASTEROS.com/free. And I really do hope you take advantage of this. It'll be a benefit to you, and patronizing Asteros helps support this show, which I appreciate very, very much. Thank you, Asteros. All right, let's continue with Mr. Shapiro.
Today, there's a lot of talk about how this is going to radically reshift the state of play in the United States politically, how this is going to turn into a hot-button political issue all across the United States in federal elections, how 2022 will be decided on abortion, 2024 will be decided on abortion, 2028 will be decided on abortion. Wrong, wrong, and wrong.
Okay, here is where I totally disagree with Ben. I think this was a gimme from the Democrats to the Republicans. Now, obviously we are both just guessing, but I think people feel a lot more passionately about this than he thinks they do. The Democrats right now, and I'm just talking about your average everyday Democrat, is feeling the pinch, is looking at the gas pump. But there are a few issues that will even transcend the hit to the pocketbook, because people will go to the stocks for certain things. And when they think a fundamental right of women, and who they believe is an oppressed group, is at stake, they will fight for that. Whether you agree or not with their position, I do think this is one of the things that they will go to the stocks for. I guess we'll see in November.
If you think that is going to motivate votes for Democrats, that Democrats deeply in California and New York, they're going to be deeply exercised about the abortion issue. In Mississippi, you got another thing coming. And the reason I know this is the case is because in May of 2021, Texas passed a law. That law effectively ended abortion in the state of Texas. This has been true for over a year in the state of Texas. And up until 5 minutes ago, no one thought that this was going to affect the 2022 election. It's not even affecting Beto O'Rourke in the Texas gubernatorial election.
Okay, Ben, you're smarter than this. to compare a law that was in place, but it was very unclear whether it would hold up constitutionally, to a situation after it's made clear that a cherished case, Roe versus Wade, was overturned. To compare those two reactions and those two electoral realities, come on, guy, you know better than that. Now, I still could be wrong, ultimately, but to claim, oh, this is just assured because before the case was overturned, it didn't really rile or lather anybody up. That does not at all follow that things are going to remain the same, because all things have not remained equal.
The biggest impact of this is probably going to be a continued polarization between red and blue. People are going to vote with their feet. You're going to see more liberal people stay in New York and Connecticut and New Jersey and Massachusetts, and you're going to see more conservative people stay in places in the South or move from north to south. And you're going to see people who are pro-choice in the South move to the north or move to California. Like, that continuing polarization is going to maintain.
Absolutely agree there, and I dealt with this on a different show where I think, and it's something I'm here for, if it can be done peacefully, but I'm not so sure it can be done peacefully, and that is we are setting ourselves up for the breakup into smaller groups of this country. This just cannot hold. This divide just cannot hold. And like I had said before, I was really, persuaded by the argument that the reason this polarization hasn't caused this before is because oftentimes the political divide ran down the center of the dining room table. That is not going to be the case anymore. This is the flashpoint, I think. And as you then have not just the divide in the minds, but you actually have the divide literally, geographically, the chess table is set. And as I said, philosophically, I'm here for it because I'm all about secession to smaller and smaller units down to the individual. The matter is, can this be done peacefully? Speaking of peaceful, and maybe a way to get us beyond the divide, is electoral reform. And speaking of electoral reform, I would like to mention another one of my sponsors, approval voting. Approval voting moves us beyond two-party thinking. It will lead to fewer spoilers, as voters can vote for both a candidate that they really like, who has no real chance of winning, and also a more popular candidate who does have a chance of winning. It will lead to more civility. When a group of friends wants to stay friends and are trying to decide on a restaurant or movie, they use a show of hands, which is approval voting. It will lead to less polarization. The voter is not forced to focus on only two candidates. Again, approval voting moves us beyond two-party thinking. You can contact Colorado's approval voting effort by phone or text at 720-439-6000 or search for Colorado's approval voting party.
Within 3 weeks, I promise you, within 3 weeks, a lot of this is going to have died down. Within 6 months, it certainly is going to have died down.
Okay, it's been more than 3 weeks, and it hasn't died down, and I don't think it's going to die down in 6 months. Sorry, that is barking moonbat talk. You are being delusional.
The amount of ignorance and lies that are being purveyed by the left on this particular issue, truly insane. One, they keep saying that the Supreme Court just outlawed abortion. The Supreme Court did not outlaw abortion. The Supreme Court delegated it back to the states. The Supreme Court clearly cannot outlaw abortion.
Okay, that is true, but incomplete. And I think he knows what people are saying. Now, are there completely ignorant people that think that's what happened? Certainly. But come on, let's be fair. Now, I know his is an opinionated show. It's not intended to be some fair, balanced reporting. No, the Supreme Court did not outlaw abortion. However, what it did do is pave the way for abortion to be outlawed in certain states. And if that's where you live, that's the world to you. That's the country to you. If you're in statewide, you think it really matters unless you're willing to move or travel to get an abortion, that state A doesn't allow it. People's roots and hearts are with their communities. So, yes, technically you're correct, but you're missing the forest for the trees in the point that they are trying to make. And again, I'm not taking a side here. I just really would like to tone down the rhetoric and for people to have more real conversations.
Doesn't have the power to outlaw abortion. So that's number one. You're seeing the left just tell sheer lies. You'll see a meme going around about how these states are going to bar people from having removals of ectopic pregnancies, or if you've had a miscarriage and you have to have some sort of procedure to get the miscarried fetus removed from the uterus. This is going to count as there's not a single state. Show me the legislative language that does this.
Okay. You want to talk about misrepresentations and getting really, really close to actually lying. This is unconscionable, Ben, and you know better. Let's go back in time about 3 years where in Ohio there was proposed legislation that really said some barking moonbat things about ectopic pregnancies. So to act as if this fear is just completely ill-founded, like somebody just pulled it out of their rear end, is not being honest. Let's take a look at a video from that particular circumstance in Ohio.
A state lawmaker is under fire tonight for a bill that would outlaw insurance coverage for abortions in Ohio. Good evening, everyone. I'm Colleen Marshall.
I'm Mark. Part of the outrage has to do with ectopic pregnancies. And as our Jason Aubrey reports, something the lawmaker claims that some say is medically impossible. Jason Aubrey.
Jason's joining us from the State House tonight.
An
Jason?
ectopic pregnancy. Good afternoon, everyone. An ectopic pregnancy happens when a fertilized egg attaches to the wrong place, usually in the fallopian tubes, but this can happen in other places as well. Now, ultimately, this pregnancy, which cannot be carried to term, can pose a serious mortal risk to the mother. Representative John Becker says, due to the risk to the life of the mother, his bill provides an exception to allow for ectopic pregnancies to be terminated or moved to the uterus.
Well, that's not an easy solution, but it is possible. It's medically possible to do that, and this bill allows for that procedure, and it specifically states that that procedure is not an abortion.
Medical professionals say there are a couple of problems with this statement. Still, Becker doubled down, saying the fertilized egg can be moved.
It has been done, but it is rare, and I think as future technology improves, then something like that will be more viable.
No technology exists at this time that allows us to do that.
Dr. Stuart Jones has been an OBGYN for 28 years and works for Ohio Health. He took exception to Becker's bill characterizing the procedure as an abortion to begin with.
It's not an elective abortion. There is no way of saving this pregnancy. If I were to allow this pregnancy to continue, even if there was a heartbeat there in the tube, this woman will eventually rupture her tube and potentially bleed to death.
Dr. Jones says he is unaware of any technology or efforts being made to develop such technology that would make transplanting an ectopic pregnancy viable.
All right, more on this when we come back after the break. Remember that you can always reach out to me at pinkflameofliberty@gmail.com, and you can inquire about very affordable sponsorship opportunities, or please do check out my channel at youtube.com/pinkflameofliberty. Okay, welcome back. And to continue on the point we were talking about before, which was the left claim that this is going to result in difficulties for things like ectopic pregnancies, and I keep saying presidencies. And is this a Freudian slip with Biden? Is he growing, in the fallopian tube? And miscarriages and things like that. Is there any legislation right at the moment that would do that? No. But as we've seen with the Ohio proposed legislation, it is certainly possible the minute you open this Pandora's box, and it's not entirely unreasonable because it has happened before. But here's something just a little more practical. We are a very litigious society. So when you create uncertainty in the minds of medical professionals who already have a huge malpractice insurance burden, that they're not sure where the line is. They're not sure where there might be some ignorance in enforcement, that you don't think that this will make them step back a little, or make them maybe delay treatment or refuse treatment for fear that they might be getting too close to the line or uncertainty on their part where the line is, you are just not living in reality. That is reality. It's not an unreasonable fear. So you shouldn't be calling people liars and all kinds of names for that particular fear. May they be overstating it? Most certainly. The way you're overstating that it's not a possibility. Bad. Both sides bad.
Some of the other moral arguments being made by the freaked out left, Anna Navarro, who used to be considered a Republican. I'm not sure why. She was on The View, the repository of all human stupidity. And she actually made the argument that we definitely 100% need abortion because she has Down syndrome family members, which sounds horrifically eugenic and also pretty evil. Like, there's some members of my family who I'm not super fond of. I also have never made the public argument that they should probably have been killed in the womb. That seems awkward.
All right. Whew. Now this one, this one has its element of monstrosity. I will absolutely agree that arguments have been made, and there are even at least one country that has no Downs babies because they abort them all. And this diminishing of disabled life just makes me want to retch. But when you're going to call someone a monster and even point out to the monstrosity of their words, if there is even the slightest bit of mitigation in order to be fair, you do need to bring it up. Now, I am not going to diminish at all the idea that it's monstrous to want to just rid the world of disabled people. She did end her quote, which was just very badly worded and does come off exactly as he says. But she did end it with the fact that there is a desperation in some families because they don't know how they're going to be able to afford to take care of a profoundly disabled family member. Now, that doesn't mean, off them. But we do need to face the reality that that is what some families are facing, and we need to encourage alternative solutions, charitable solutions. Now, of course, whether or not it is moral, it isn't. Do you want to, get rid of a pregnancy simply because the baby is going to be disabled? Just because we can put aside the morality of that for now to deal with the reality of families that have to take care of this person. Because neglect is also immoral. Now, I'm not making the argument that it's better to be dead than neglected. That's not it at all. I'm just trying to fairly represent the situation and the concern that she brought up.
I am not anybody to tell you what you need to do with your life or with your uterus. And because I have a family with a lot of special needs kids. I have a brother who's 57 and has the mental and motor skills of a 1-year-old. And I know what that means financially, emotionally, physically for a family. And I know not all families can do it. And I have a step-granddaughter who was born with Down syndrome. And you know what? It is very difficult in Florida to get services.
I can just tell her that she needs to, she really needs to step back and listen to that, because I don't think it came out the way she intended. But we do, as compassionate human beings, need to take heed of that last part. Now, the answer, as a libertarian, is not force funding. But we do need to find a voluntary solution for families in distress.
Here's Martha Raddatz at ABC News lashing out.
On Friday morning, women in this country, like they have for nearly 50 years, woke up with a constitutional right to abortion, a right enshrined by the Supreme Court's 1973 decision in Roe v. Wade and reaffirmed again and again. But just after 10 a.m. on Friday, a legal earthquake, the court stripping women of that fundamental right.
Okay, it's not a fundamental right. That's the whole point of the case. The whole point of the case is that it is not a fundamental right.
And the whole point of their disagreement is that they disagree, Ben. This is just terrible rhetoric on your part. I understand. You agree with the court this time, But just go back a year where they're arguing it's a fundamental right. You would be arguing it isn't, and they would go, yeah, but the court agrees with us. You don't think the court agreeing with them made them right any more than they think the court now disagreeing with them makes them right. You're acting as if rights exist, dependent upon whether or not the Supreme Court recognizes them. Though you aren't really saying that, because you do recognize later on in another clip that we'll play that at times the law is wrong. So appealing to the law is not an answer. Now, I understand you're saying that is the whole point of the case. Yeah, but it doesn't mean it's right. The fact is, rights exist independent of these legislative or court judicial decisions. For instance, we have a fundamental right to self-defense. We have that right despite the fact that the government right now doesn't really recognize it. They recognize it in a limited sense, but that doesn't mean our rights are now limited. It just means that the government's not recognizing them, and they are punishing us if we wished to exercise them. So I understand that that's what you think the whole case was about, and they got it right. The fact is, they disagree. This is really a non-controversial, axiomatic statement from the left. It's not really something to ridicule. It is the fundamental disagreement coming from their perspective. And you need to be able to step into their shoes to understand why this is so distressing. Just imagine if you found out tomorrow that there is something that you actually fundamentally believed you had a fundamental right to, and the court refused to recognize it or says each state can decide for itself. Well, when it comes to rights, no, the states can't. You have them by virtue of being a human being, because I believe in natural rights, and so did the Declaration of Independence. So your mockery of their being upset just as disingenuous, or you're just refusing to step into their shoes. And in order to be a fair critic, that's what you need to be able to do.
Yeah, I love how the entire media, they're taking their lead, as you'll see, from the Democratic Party, right? The Democratic Party is making the argument that a fundamental right existed and then it didn't exist. Okay, but by that logic, by that same exact logic, there was a fundamental right in the United States for states to segregate their trolley cars. And then that right was stripped in Brown versus Board. That is not the way any of this works. Either it's in the Constitution or it's not in the Constitution.
Either it's a right or it's not a right. And that is where your fundamental disagreement is. The fact is, if it's a right, it was a right that was stripped away. If it wasn't, it wasn't. You're just arguing in a circle and acting like it's a profound square. It is not.
Abortion is not in the Constitution. It is not a fundamental right. It was never a fundamental right. You can't make a moral argument that it was that argument does not exist on a moral level, and it doesn't exist on a constitutional legal level.
Well, people obviously disagree. I disagreed earlier. I do think a reasonable argument can be made that the entire idea and system of us having the rights in the Bill of Rights and in the context of the Declaration of Independence, that all of that is absolutely incoherent without a fundamental grounding principle of personal self-ownership and bodily autonomy. Now, the bodily autonomy is not unrebuttable. As I said before, there are circumstances where you can be compelled to act contrary to that. And I'm not even going to get into that this show. I'm going to do that on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Pink Flame of Liberty, because as I said, I do think there are cases where, in theory, that, again, even in this circumstance, that the fundamental right to self-autonomy, in theory, could be overridden. Now, I don't think the state ever should do that for lots of reasons, and the fact that there are circumstances in which the cure is worse than the disease, the rights violations that would proceed from protecting some rights would just overall be absolutely detrimental. But to act as if no kind of self-ownership, bodily autonomy of the woman argument can be made and can be grounded in the fundamental philosophy of the Constitution is just mistaken. You might not find it persuasive. It certainly isn't within your strict constructionist paradigm. but you act as if your opponents or people who disagree with you are so stupid that they walk into walls face first. In fact, sometimes you even outright say that, and I just don't think that is fair, equitable, or just. Okay, we are coming up on a break, and then we will be entering into our final segment. Talk to you then. All right, welcome back to the last and final segment. Let's continue.
They have said that the chief obstacle to human equality is that women have had to bear children, that this is a bad thing. And if we could only obliterate the sex distinction between men and women, suddenly women would lead freer, happier, more fulfilled lives.
Okay, the context is he is speaking of the claims of feminism, or what he is claiming is the claims of feminism. Is that an accurate representation? It might be of some completely lunatic academics, but your average feminist does not believe this. They do not believe this at all. What they do believe is that there are certain biological realities to being a woman, and one of them is without being able to control your reproductive cycle, that your opportunities are limited, because you will be subject, if you're a normal, by normal I don't mean between that and abnormal, your average person with relationships who wants a relationship with somebody, you are going to be bound to this cycle of uncontrolled pregnancies, and that does limit your options. It is just cold, hard biology. And being able to control that has given women a measure of control over their life. That doesn't mean you're trying to obliterate the difference between men and women. It just does mean that as technology progresses, there are a lot of biological realities that we have gotten past as a species. Before antibiotics, you want to know what life was like? You could die from just a cut. Go look at the lists of death, like in these old Victorian newsletters. Death by teeth was common because of infection. Are we going to say, oh, we're just trying to, but religious people made the argument at that time that this is, part of God's punishment upon humanity, and you can't seek to get beyond that. Doesn't mean you hate being a woman. It doesn't mean you're trying to obliterate any kind of differences between the fact that women can have children. It is just seeking greater opportunity. And I can tell you, I personally have never wanted children, and I'm glad I've been able to control my reproduction. And I do see that as a plus. For many people, they want children, and having children is a blessing, but uncontrolled, just unlimited childbearing isn't necessarily. So, Ben, you were just misrepresenting the more common version and treating the most extreme version as if it's normative.
Somebody who comes along like a Hitler and becomes popular, and or somebody who gets elected, or even a coup. Because in Spain in the 1930s, part of the atmosphere of making way for a military coup was that women became like, they got independence for the first time. They could own their own property. There were a lot of gender emancipation. So every time these strongmen come along, they are the agents of taking those rights away and reversing the emancipation of women in every way.
So, it's just amazing. If you're in favor of maintaining the lives of the unborn, it's Hitlerian.
Okay, well, you agreed. Her argument was ridiculous. And it's funny that you don't see the same pattern in your own arguments. So, if you're in favor of controlling, being able to control one's own reproduction, and in the timing and planning of your family, then you just want to obliterate the family and obliterate all distinctions between men and women. You are making the same type of arguments. You are, a lot of times, Ben, the exact caricature on the right that you make of the left. it's two sides of the same coin so often. And you unironically, or ironically, I'm not even sure what's the right term to use here, but you don't see it.
Do you think those companies should pull their businesses from Georgia when and if this abortion restriction goes into effect?
I would tell every single business and every single woman that they should do what is best for the women who work for them. They need to make certain that they are accommodating the very real healthcare challenges that will face women in the state of Georgia.
They've got nothing. I mean, that's an unbelievable statement. She wants corporations to pull out of her home state.
Okay, that was Stacey Abrams, and she didn't say that. She was asked that, but like a typical politician, she pivoted and answered a different question. She never said that businesses should pull out of the state. She said businesses should do what they think is best for the women they employ. She left that kind of open. But for you to just say, what? That's what she said, and you're trying to make her out to be an inconsistent hypocrite because the whole Major League Baseball thing where she had originally said, should pull out of Georgia, and then realized that was going to cost Georgians money and, backtracked. So she may be a politician, may be crooked, as, the two words are kind of synonymous, doesn't mean she's stupid. Doesn't mean she doesn't know the artful dodge.
By the way, this will happen. Major U.S. companies, including Meta and JP Chase on Friday, said they'll cover travel costs for employees who seek legal abortions outside their home state.
And this will happen that he started out this little section with was that companies will pull out of states. But then he goes on to talk about things that aren't pulling out of states. It's talking about providing additional employee, what they would call benefits, but it's not, this will happen, and it already is, and then gives examples of things other than that happening. Very, very sloppy, Ben, but let's continue with the rest of your sentence here, or a little segment here.
After the Supreme Court released a ruling that overturned Roe v. Wade, according to ABC News. Several corporations in recent weeks, including Amazon and Starbucks, announced expanded health benefits to pay travel fees incurred by workers seeking an abortion if the procedure is unavailable near where they live.
Yep, that's not pulling out. That's the free market providing. I don't have to agree with those decisions, but it's the free market.
Congress can override what the Supreme Court did and pass a law to legalize abortion. They cannot. To do that, we need to elect 2 more Democratic senators, and to hold the House, President Biden will sign a law codifying Roe if that happens. That is untrue. That law will immediately be struck down by the Supreme Court, as it should be.
Okay, correct. Well, not whether it should be or not, I'm not even given an opinion on that, but it would be immediately struck down by the Supreme Court. So any promises to do that are hollow promises unless, the court is stacked, which is another thing that the left is floating. But to act like it is completely outrageous to say that, it might be outrageous in today's context, but the legislature, the federal legislature has already gone way beyond its bounds, and things like the Civil Rights Act, not in the way that it is restricting government from discriminating, because government should never be allowed to discriminate, but the restrictions it puts on private businesses under the guise of interstate commerce or under the guise of quote-unquote public accommodations. No, if you're private property and you're private business, even though I would find it absolutely repugnant and distasteful, you have the natural right to discriminate. And that shouldn't be anything that should be any of the federal government's business to legislate, but they have. So it's not at all ridiculous to go, well, if it's a fundamental right that a woman has, just like they're claiming it's a fundamental right, a civil right, that there is to be free from discrimination and alleged public accommodations. No, it's not so crazy. This government is completely out of control. So it's not at all out of the realm of possibility that this someday could happen. It could happen with the Supreme Court that we have now? No. I mean, you're correct there, but you can be correct and still omit things and act like it's completely ridiculous when it's not.
You know who writes that? Ian Millhiser, the moron over at Vox, knows that. He talks about how the Women's Health Protection Act, which he's very much in favor of, There's no constitutional basis for it. It would get struck down almost immediately.
There's no constitutional basis for controlling the private property and bodies of people's own labor, their own efforts, to say that you need to be enslaved to other people. If you want to make a living, you are forced to provide services to everybody, even if you don't want to. That is not aggression. That's just you being, I can't use on radio, but let's just say a big fat jerk.
Congress can't simply declare a right to abortion and then use it to cram down various abortion policies on states.
Congress can't simply declare that everybody has a right to your labor and your... Oh, wait, yeah, they did, didn't they?
Doesn't have the power to do that. You require a constitutional amendment to create a law that is now off limits by the states. You can't just arrogate that power even to to Congress. Again, Congress's power, largely in terms of what states can do, derives from basically the Necessary and Proper Clause and the Commerce Clause. There's no case that the Necessary and Proper Clause covers abortion law, and the Commerce Clause does not cover abortion law.
And we have seen in the history of this country that there just are no brakes on those things. So, not out of the realm of future possibility. Okay, everyone, that is all we have time to cover. I just hope that I helped you listen and think about things a little bit more charitably, ironically, and critically. So, until next week, thank you so much, and I hope you have an awesome week. Bye-bye.
You gotta take what you're given, that's how we live it. Don't be mad at the system, it's simply how we've existed. I hear a lot of people talking like they politicians and choose to be an accountant because it's safe in a business, not because they want to